We'll revisit the topic of Birchas HaTorah, the topic of the brachas we make before we learn Torah, before this year. And I'm not talking about the brachas you make when you get called up to an aliyah. That's also Birchas HaTorah, but that's a totally different institution.
In fact, that is included in the Birchas HaTorah, isn't it?
Correct. In fact, it's the whole discussion whether the Yerushalmi, that even though we assume the Birchas HaTorah we make every morning, that's biblical in nature, the blessings, the brachas we make when we get called up is only rabbinical. There is a Jerusalem Talmud that says that when you make them privately to yourself, they're rabbinical, and the biblical ones are barabim, but we don't follow that opinion. We assume that the Birchas HaTorah we make, whether we make it at home in shul, that has a biblical status, and the brachas we read before we get called for an aliyah, that's only rabbinical. So that's the way we follow, and that's the working assumption. So, and Birchas HaTorah is unique is that it's a biblical bracha. Most brachas are only rabbinical. Birchas HaTorah, the bracha itself is biblical, which is unusual. So what we want to understand today is what is the nature of the bracha? What type of bracha is Birchas HaTorah? So we know in general there are different categories of brachas. There are different categories of brachas. So one category of bracha is the classical Birchas HaMitzvah, the bracha you make before you perform a mitzvah. As the Gemara tells us in Pesachim, you usually make the bracha over l'asiyasin before, like by a tefillin, by all other mitzvahs, we make them first the bracha and then the mitzvah, with a couple of exceptions, like obviously the Gemara tells us a ger. He can't make the bracha, or she can't make the bracha before because she's not Jewish, so she has to wait till after the mikvah. But generally speaking, we make the brachas before you do it. And there's a second category called Birchas Shevach v'Hodah, brachas of praise and thanksgiving. That on something happens that we're having a Shevach v'Hodah. So there are the two schools of thought on whether Birchas HaTorah is a Birchas Shevach v'Hodah or is a Birchas HaMitzvah. The Ramban in the whole surface of Mitzvah Sasei Tetzvav, and I'll call you his Russian, he writes, Shenistavena l'hodos l'shmo yisparach b'chol eishen nikra b'Torah ala tova hagdola. He clearly writes that Birchas HaTorah is a bracha of praise and thanksgiving. We're thanking God that He gave the Jewish people the Torah. It's a bracha of praise and thanksgiving. And the other school of thought is that it's a classical Birchas HaMitzvah. Just like we make a bracha before we do any mitzvah. Talmud Torah, Keneged Kulam, Talmud Torah, learning Torah is a major mitzvah as well. So we make the bracha before we learn. And some want to point out, perhaps that's the issue, whether you hold the Machlokas Ramban, and whether you hold Birchas HaTorah is D'oraisa D'Rabbanan, is if you hold it to Birchas Shevach v'Hodah, so then it's more likely you could say it's a bracha min HaTorah. But if it's just a Birchas HaMitzvah, we normally assume a Birchas HaMitzvah is only D'Rabbanan. So, my nafkamina, Jeff.
The bracha Asher Kereshan Mitzvah seems to point to the direction of the Birchas Mitzvah.
The lesson of Birchas HaTorah.
Yes.
Right, that would get into which bracha we're talking about. Because
yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, look at the words.
In fact, some point out that there's a whole discussion whether it's two or three brachas. Because some say the first two, Vaharevna, is all connected. And the difference is when you're listening to someone else's brachas, if you stayed up all night, Shavuos, when do you answer Amen? Do you answer Amen La'asok b'divrei Torah, or we're machmir to try to answer Amen at the end? But that's at some point out. We have two brachas by Birchas HaTorah. It's not either or. The bracha we make La'asok b'divrei Torah, Asher Kedushan V'Zimano, that's the Birchas HaMitzvah. And the classical Asher Bacha Bano Mikol Ha'amim, that God you chose is among that. So someone to answer up both by saying we make Amen. That we make both of them. And we have two brachas. One is the Birchas HaMitzvah, and one is the right. But my nafkamina, what's the practical difference whether I say either way, whether I fulfill a rabbinical mitzvah, biblical mitzvah, we'll assume a biblical mitzvah. What's the difference whether I say it's a Birchas HaMitzvah or a Birchas Shavach? Either way, I have to do it. Either way I do it, I'm zealous in the performance of my mitzvah, so my nafkamina. So there'll be a bunch of them, but one nafkamina is as follows. Do you have to learn immediately after you make the blessing? I'll quote you a Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah. The Rambam writes, B'chol yom chayev adam levarach shalosh brachas. See, he says it's 3. The Rambam says every day you're obligated to make 3 brachas of Birchas HaTorah. V'achaka korei ma'at midivrei Torah. And afterwards, learn a little divrei Torah. Of course, he means the whole day learn a lot of divrei Torah, but he means immediately just... So some people are very makbid to follow the Rambam, and they mean the Rambam says that's all you're allowed to learn. So what do we see from the Rambam? The Rambam seems to be working with which opinion? That Birchas HaTorah is a classical Birchas HaMitzvah, or it's a Birchas Shavach Vodah? What would you say from the Rambam?
It's a mitzvah, because it's
correct. So the Rambam seems to be working with consistent with his view that it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, and just like I can't make a bracha on my tefillin and come back 2 hours later and put them on, so too when I make a Birchas HaTorah, I have to sit down and learn. Of course, it's simple because that's why we have it in our siddur. We have psukim of Torah in there because to fulfill that opinion. However, if you hold it's a Birchas Shavach V'Hodah, like the Ramban, so perhaps there's no reason you have to learn right away. You have to learn anyway because it's a mitzvah of Talmud Torah, but not because you have to learn immediately after the bracha. That would be one practical difference, whether you have to learn immediately after Birchas HaTorah. Yeah.
But didn't you just indicate that the Rambam says that after the bracha you should learn a little?
The Rambam, Maimonides, yeah, he says, Acha korimad, you have to learn right after the bracha.
So then he must hold that it's a
Birchas HaMitzvah.
Birchas HaMitzvah.
Yeah, I'm taking the Ramban,
Ramban, okay, sorry.
Nechmanides says it's a Birchas Shavach V'Hodah, and the Maimonides says it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, right?
Sorry.
And second nafkamina, I'll read you the Shulchan Aruch, you tell me which sheet it's taking. The Shulchan Aruch writes in Siman Mem Zayin Sif Daled, Hamaharir b'divrei Torah. One is in deep thought. You know, like it happens every morning. You wake up, you're thinking about the shir from yesterday or what you did on Shabbos. Do you have to run and make the Birchas HaTorah? Wait, stop. You have to block out your thoughts of Torah before you get to that siddur and make the Birchas HaTorah or not. In other words, can I learn Torah behirur in my mind, where we usually learn it anyway, but without articulating or verbalizing, am I obligated to make a Birchas HaTorah or not? So the Machaber writes, the Yosef Chaira writes in the Shulchan Aruch, Eino tzarach levarach. If you're thinking and learning, or I should say only thinking and learning, only in parentheses, then according to the Machaber, one does not require a Birchas HaTorah. The Vilna Gaon goes psycho on the Machaber. Are you kidding me? How are you telling me thinking and learning isn't a mitzvah of Talmud Torah? That's all. As the Vigisi Bo Yomam V'Layla. The pasuk is just sitting there in deep thought, day and night learning. So what do you mean that if you're thinking in Torah and not verbalized, you don't have to make a bracha? So it's a major machlokas, the Vilna Gaon and the Shulchan Aruch, whether you wake up in the morning and you can't control yourself, those thoughts of Torah just pop into your head, do you have to run to the siddur and run for that Birchas HaTorah, or you could wait until after you get dressed, maybe come to shul, whenever you make your Birchas HaTorah? So what's the issue at hand between the Machaber and the Vilna Gaon? Why does the Machaber say Ein tzarach levarach, and why does the Vilna Gaon say you have to? What's the issue at hand?
Oh, whether it's one of the two.
Correct. So the issue is whether it's a Birchas HaMitzvah or a Birchas HaTorah. In other words, everyone, or you would think everyone would have to agree that thinking in Torah is the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Or else you guys would be in trouble now, because I'm doing the talking here. Or anytime you go to a shir, I'm listening, I'm not learning, so that's ridiculous. Of course, thinking and learning is Talmud Torah. That shouldn't be an issue. The machlokes is, what is the nature of Birchas HaMitzvah, Birchas HaTorah? So the Vilna Gaon clearly learns it's a Birchas HaMitzvah. It's a bracha before a mitzvah, and therefore, if you're thinking and learning, you have to make the bracha. The Machaber seems to be working with the Ramban, Nechma in his opinion, that's a Birchas Shavach V'Hodah, and perhaps then you could say maybe they only instituted the Birchas Shavach V'Hodah when you're actually articulating it. But it's not enough, or as we'll see the Rav Chaim, what he calls the Torah, it's only the Torah itself demands it. Perhaps as we have a discussion, the Gemara later on, maybe only learning the written law requires the bracha, maybe, but that seems to be the issue. If it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, there's nothing to talk about. Of course, you should be making a bracha. The Machaber seems to be working that it's a Birchas Shavach V'Hodah, and hence he could entertain, and not only entertain, and conclude that Hira does not require a bracha. Third nafkamina. So far we had, you have to learn right away. The second one was thinking in Torah. The third one is, what about Amiris Psuchim Derach Tachanunim? In other words, the classical case would be during Elul, the month of Elul, Slichos, and when we read Slichos before a fast day, whenever we're going to do it, or someone gets up and says Tehillim, the Torah is Tehillim, not because of learning, that we know when you say Slichos, you're reading Psukim from the Torah, or Nevi'im, or Ksuvim. However, your intention isn't the Torah's Talmud Torah. You're not saying Slichos for learning purposes. You're saying it as part of prayer, asking God to forgive us and everything that goes with it. So the question is, I'm just reading Slichos, which has psukim from Tanakh in it. Would I be obligated in making a Birchas HaTorah before I did Slichos? For Sfardim, the whole month of Elul, it's no Geya. They say the Sfardim go, they have Slichos the whole month. We don't begin until a week before Rosh Hashanah. As I say, I like to not eat rice on Pesach and not have meat, but I didn't have to wake up for the month of Elul at 6 o'clock. But either way, it wasn't my choice. I was born into it. So either way, so let's go see what the Shulchan Aruch says. So the Shulchan Aruch brings down two opinions. The Shulchan Aruch brings down two opinions, whether one is obligated to make a Birchas HaTorah before they say Slichos, or it doesn't have to be Slichos. So what's the issue? One issue could be, is this considered Talmud Torah? When I read from Tehillim of Amris or Kriyas Shema during davening or Slichos, does that have a din of status of Talmud Torah? So perhaps that's the issue. If it's a status of Talmud Torah, so then if I hold it to Birchas HaMitzvah, I'd have to make. But if it's not Talmud Torah, and if it's not Talmud Torah, if it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, I wouldn't have to make. Or perhaps you could say everyone agrees there's no Torah, there's no fulfillment of Talmud Torah when you read Psukim as part of davening. The machlokes is if you require a bracha anyway. So if it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, so then of course you don't require a bracha, because you only make a Birchas HaMitzvah if you're going to actually get credit for Talmud Torah. Mm-hmm. But if it's a Birchas Shavach V'Hodah, so I don't have to be getting the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. If I'm thanking God and giving us the Torah, I'm reading from the Torah, perhaps that would generate a bracha. So that could be two possible ways of understanding whether you have to make a bracha, and either whether you get a mitzvah of Talmud Torah, then it depends if it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, Birchas Shavach, or perhaps everyone agrees there's no mitzvah of Talmud Torah, and therefore that's the machlokes. The Vilna Gaon would say no bracha, and perhaps the Machaber, if we say he holds it to Birchas Shavach V'Hodah, or B, if we take the logic, then the Machaber passed in explicitly by Bahar here, no bracha over here. He seems to be, could be those two issues, and he's not sure if it is Talmud Torah or not. Another practical difference perhaps would be women, nashim. A woman obligated to make Birchas HaTorah every morning. So let's look at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch writes in Simon Mem Zayin, Nashim mevarchos Birchas HaTorah. Women make, we have to see what it means. Can, have to, is very vague. It's very wisely, I might add. The Machaber of Yosef Cairo, Nashim mevarchos. He says women, it depends how you interpret it, can or have to make Birchas HaTorah. So let's see how the Magen Avram interprets it. It'll be a machlokas, the Magen Avram, the Vilna Gaon, what the Machaber means. Can or have to. So the Magen Avram writes, Nashim chayavos govarach. The Magen Avram learns Pshat in the Machaber, women have to make a Birchas HaTorah just like men. Because he says, this woman have to keep Shabbos, and to keep Shabbos, you got to know Hilchos Shabbos. Women have to keep a kosher, they got to know kosher. So since they're obligated to learn the things that are nogeya to them, so therefore they're obligated. And the Vilna Gaon says no. Mevarchas means like, in general, just like a woman has an option to make a bracha on a lulav, on a mitzvah aseh shazman grama, on things that are exempt from. Talmud Torah, strictly they're exempt from, and therefore they have an option of making the bracha. So that's the machlokas Vilna Gaon and the Machaber, or I should say the machlokas the Vilna Gaon and the Magen Avram, how you learn the Machaber, whether women have to make a Birchas HaTorah or have the option. So again, it's the Vilna Gaon consistent with this view, because the Vilna Gaon holds it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, and they're exempt. So therefore, so then that gets into the general machlokas. There's a general machlokas Sfarim Ashkenaz. If a woman volunteers on mitzvah, she's not obligated. Could she make the bracha asher kedishana mitzvah v'tzivanu? So the Bechaba goes with the Rambam that no, and we go with the Bali Tosfos and the Ramah that yes. So the Machaber writes they have to, and in fact, interesting. The Machaber usually says women cannot even volunteer mitzvah aseh. They can't volunteer the brachas of a mitzvah. So clearly, it claims to be the Machaber is working that Birchas HaTorah is a Birchas Shevach v'Hodah, and you're thanking God that the Torah was given to you. And the Gra obviously is consistent with his view that it's going on the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, and therefore, like every other mitzvah, it depends on the machlokas Machaber Ramah whether you say they have the option to making a bracha or not. So again, we had a question whether Birchas HaTorah is the Birchas Shevach v'Hodah, a bracha of praise, or it's the Birchas HaMitzvah. My nafkamina, what's some practical differences? One, we says you have to learn right away. If it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, you have to learn right away. Right, you have to make the bracha. If it's a Birchas Shevach v'Hodah, you don't. Secondly, we said, what about saying psukim, but not with the intention of learning, with the intention of asking God for bakashas rachamim? So again, so if we assume there's no Talmud Torah, so that would be the issue. If it's a Birchas Shevach v'Hodah, perhaps you'd have to. If it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, you don't have to. And then we said, what about thinking in Torah? Thinking in Torah is definitely a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So the Gra would say you make a bracha because he says it's a regular Birchas HaMitzvah. And the Machaber says no, he also seems to be saying it's a Birchas Shevach v'Hodah. And another nafkamina we just gave is, and it goes hand in hand, women, the Vilna Gaon says women have the option of making a bracha since it's a Birchas HaMitzvah. So like all other Birchas HaMitzvah, they have the option to doing the mitzvah, making the bracha. And the Machaber who says, according to the Magen Avram, who says that they have to, he would say it's a Birchas Shevach v'Hodah. There's an interesting Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. He says something similar to the Ramban, not exactly the same, but his question is, the Birchas HaTorah ain't ha-bracha al kiyam ha-mitzvah shel Talmud Torah, clearly against the Vilna Gaon. He says, the Birchas HaTorah we make is not going on the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, but he says it's a special halacha, ki shem Hashem ekra, when you call it the name of God, hava golda, learning Torah itself demands a bracha. And he calls it the chefza of Torah. When you're actually learning physically the Torah, it requires a bracha. And that's why they point out that according to Rav Chaim then, you shouldn't have to learn right away, because if it's not going on the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, You wouldn't have to. However, if you're doing slichus in the morning, and you would have to, because if you read, anytime you read from the Torah or Tanakh, the chefza requires you to make a bracha Avi. What did you want to say?
No, then it would be like that's a suffix. Like you're making it also suffix, and right? You'd say the pasuk of the psukim from Torah, from Mishnah, from Gemara, from the mitzvah, also suffix. So if you want to say that even still working with the Mechaber, that it's not anything different than saying that it's not it's still Shevach Avodah, but you're up to suffix that it could be. We see the others.
Right. So we'll see. Right. In fact, that's why. In fact, Rav Chaim says a very interesting Gemara in Brachas. The Gemara wants to know on what type of Torah. We said if you learn Torah, it requires a Birchas HaTorah. What kind of Torah? What do you mean, what kind of Torah? What I mean is it only if I'm learning Chumash? What about if I'm learning Gemara? What about if I'm learning Medrash? So the Gemara actually brings 4 opinions of what type of Torah requires a bracha. Is it just Psukim in the Chumash, Mikra? Or is it also Medrash together with Mikra? Or is it also Mishnah? Or is it also Gemara? So we see the Rav Chaim says, what's this machlokas? If it's on the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, what's the discussion? Everything's Torah. So therefore, that's Rav Chaim's raya. In fact, the Gemara goes through the discussion that he said it's only the chefza. That's the discussion. The Gemara, even though we paskin, I feel a Talmud because you can just say Talmud is explaining the Gemara. The whole issue is that you still only agree on. That fundamentally, perhaps it's only on Torah Shebeksav, but how do you define Torah Shebeksav? It's an interesting Gemara in Gin. The Gemara wants to know: is the majority of Torah Shebeksav or Torah Shebal Peh? Is the majority of Torah written law or oral law? Well, let's open up any Jewish library. You'll see 5 books of Moses, maybe you'll find 24 books of Tanakh. And the rest of the library is all with Gemaras, Mishnahs, all oral law. So
no-brainer?
What kind of question? So the Mefarshim saying, no, the issue is how do you define Torah Shab? What's the distinction? So let's say a lot of the stuff is Yud Gimel Midos. We learn from the different principles, and we learn out halacha. So that's the issue. At what point do you assume it's no longer considered Torah Shebeksav and Torah Shebal Peh? But either way, that's what Rav Chaim points out, that we see that if it's a mitzvah of Talmud Torah, what's the discussion? The fact that we're getting into Mikra Medrash, that means that leads Rav Chaim to believe it's similar to the Rambam, but not exactly. It's the chefza of Torah. There's a 4th opinion. So we had whether it's a Berka Shevach V'Hodah, that's the Ramban. Perhaps the Rambam, perhaps not. Definitely the Vilna Gaon, it's a Berkas HaMitzvah. We had Rav Chaim, it's a bracha on the chefza of Torah. We have a 4th opinion, perhaps Rav Soloveitchik, the Kehilas Yaakov, the Stipler. They want to say as follows. You know what Birchas HaTorah is like? It's like the bracha I made before my coffee. It's a Birchas Hanenin. It's a bracha you make before you have enjoyment, before you eat something. And in fact, that's what they want to explain a famous Gemara in the Durham. The Gemara in the Durham and the Shulchan Aruch, it's brought down the Shitas Hataz in Shulchan Aruch in Yeridea. Reish Chaf Aleph Mem Gemo. He said he asked the following question. The halacha is that if you say I'm not going to get any benefit from my friend, someone takes the neder, I'm not going to get benefit from whoever. He names someone, Mr. X, and then that person happens to be the Baal Tokeya in Shul. So the question is, are you in violation of the neder if you get hana from the shofar? So the Gemara says no. The Shulchan Aruch says, the Taz writes, mutter l'shmoa kol shofar, it's okay. However, if you made the same hana and you said, I'm not going to go to that person's shir, or I'm not going to read his svarim, so then you can't. So he says, what's the difference? How come when it comes to other mitzvahs, if someone makes a net, I'm not going to get benefit from someone. You could listen to his shofar. You could use we use this pair of tefillin, but you can't use his svarim. What's the distinction between Torah and other mitzvahs? The Taz says a very important principle. He says, because Vadai HaTorah B'samches halev, that the Torah brings joy to the heart. As we know, it's prohibited for the Avel. The different parts of Torah you cannot learn. We don't learn on Tisha B'Av. Pekudei Hashem Yisharim et Samchev Lev. He says, we know we have a principle, mitzvahs lav lahanos nitnu. Mitzvahs aren't given for our benefit. We don't do mitzvahs when we shake lulav for our benefit. However, Talmud Torah is an exception to the rule. That Talmud Torah dafka is lahanos nitnu. The purpose of Torah is to enjoy. Some people have these erroneous impressions that the highest level of learning, because learning shalol lishma is, I learned something I hate, so boring and technical. That's the opposite. The purpose of Talmud Torah is lahanos nitnu, and that's why if you make a neder that I'm not going to get benefit from him, you can't take a sefer, because the Torah is getting benefit. Lashain shar mitzvahs is mitzvahs lav lahanos nitnu.
Correct.